Welcome to a workshop offered by the University of Kentucky's Office of Work, Life, and Benefits. We always are eager to offer helpful workshops to our employees as they are managing their work and life responsibilities. And today we're going to be talking about emotional eating, why it happens, and how to curb it. Our guest speaker today is Dr. Bryla McNees. She is with our health and wellness team here at the university. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Izetta, for that introduction, and thank you for inviting me here to speak about emotional eating. And there's a lot of you here, so thank you for taking time out of your busy day. I see a lot of familiar names, so hello to those folks that I do know, and hello to anyone new that I've not met and interacted with before. So it's great to have you all here. Okay, well, I feel like this is really appropriate timing. Think people have been feeling a little tumultuous, perhaps, the last couple weeks, and still feeling so, perhaps. We are never without emotion or a reason to maybe feel compelled to emotionally eat, but it seems like perhaps this period in time might speak especially to folks in terms of this challenge. So glad that you are here. Okay. I am, well, just to give you the full proper introduction as well, I'm a dietitian with UK Health and Wellness. If there is anything that comes to mind after today that you'd like to discuss nutrition wise, always feel free to email me directly, or you can request a one-on-one nutrition consult, which is a free service that we offer. And I'm always happy to engage with folks one-on-one after today if there are needs that I might be able to help with. So just keep that in mind. Okay. All right. This is a great quote that I always love to start with when I talk about emotional eating. Um, just to kind of ground us, okay, and kind of set expectations for what we're trying to actually achieve when we talk about dealing with emotional eating. All right. This quote is from a woman, Ellen Satter. She's a dietitian who is nationally prominent, at least within our field. Most dietitians are familiar with her, and she does a lot of work around, mindful eating, emotional eating. She also does a lot of work around raising, parents who are trying to raise, kind of healthy eaters and feeding children. But I just love this quote. Emotional eating is only a problem when you abuse it. Feelings go straight to eating with no interpretation. So, to me, this quote really is saying a few things. One, I think it's implying, and I believe this, that emotional eating will happen. Okay. Now, for some folks here, and maybe that's why you're here, it happens more often than you would like, or you feel it is a coping mechanism that you are overly dependent on and want to find some alternatives to that, right? But I don't think the goal should ever be to completely expect yourself to not emotionally eat. You are going to eat perhaps when you're celebrating something or it's Super Bowl Sunday and you're eating fun football foods because it's there, right? And it's a fun environment. You still may eat sometimes when you are stressed. Or bored. Okay. So the idea is not that we are going to completely eliminate it, but the problem is when this is our primary coping mechanism, right? When food is the thing by default that we turn to when we are feeling emotional. All right. And that's the kind of second part of the quote where we're also doing it in a very automatic and habitual way, right? Where we're not even interpreting, like there's no space to even interpret, okay, this is what I'm feeling. Maybe there's another way to deal with it. It is just automatic from I'm feeling this emotion to I'm eating. Okay, and maybe that sounds familiar to folks here. But what we're going to do today is talk a little bit about how to build some space between feelings and eating and giving you an opportunity to find some other ways to cope with that. Sometimes the way to cope might still be with eating, and that will be okay, but we need to have that interpretation, that processing, that pause button in between the feelings and eating. That is what's so critical and missing for a lot of people. Does that ring a bell with anybody? Does that feel like emotional eating often happens very kind of automatically and habitually. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So you're in the right place. That's what we're gonna that's what we're gonna hone in on today. But I want to be sure people have realistic expectations for themselves, right? That some emotional eating will still happen. All right. That's okay. So what are some reasons we emotionally eat? Okay. First of all, I think we are very much conditioned to eat our feelings, whatever those feelings may be. And emotional eating can happen with good or negative feelings, right? Like I said, it can happen with celebratory things, but it can also happen, of course, with stress or sadness or loneliness or boredom. Okay. But there is a lot of messaging I think we're exposed to from a very young age, maybe from family and friends around us as perhaps setting examples of how we cope with things. Maybe that example for you was through food. Maybe people comforted you in difficult times with food. There's a lot of advertising that's out there that is kind of leading people to feel, like this is what we do to cope with feelings is we eat. This is how we reward ourselves with food. I've noticed a lot of that. So there's a lot of places that we're being kind of conditioned for this. All right. Um, of course, food is very easy and accessible, and it's generally pretty fun, right? So food, luckily for us in this society is, for most people, pretty easy to find and get your hands on some. So with it being so easy and accessible, it just makes this again a likely coping mechanism for a lot of people. And again, it's also fun. It's something that will, feel good and be enjoyable in the moment. Maybe we just don't know how else to cope. I think a lot of people feel like, they don't know any other way. And again, maybe this was, it's partly a product of kind of how, you were raised, nurture, the environment, the messaging that you've been exposed to. But a lot of us just feel like we simply don't have any other tools to cope with emotions, and that's why we default to eating. And so hopefully that's a little bit what we'll give you today, some extra tools. Certain emotions can actually prompt a physiological response to eat. So, for example, stress. Who feels like they want to eat when they're stressed? Like, yeah, Susie, yeah. Um, yeah, and so you get like some, deadline at work all of the sudden, or you're, kind of put in a pressure situation, or have a tense interaction with somebody. Stress is something that kind of triggers that flight or fight response. We all learned about that, right, when we were in school. And there's a lot of, biological things that are happening and changing when we interpret as stress. The problem is that original stress response was meant for stressors that required a physical response, right? So if you think, way back when, the threat was a saber-toothed tiger, and you had to fight it off or protect your family or your, tribe or whatever from it, you needed, extra energy perhaps, to fight off that physical stressor. But nowadays, a lot of our stressors are not physical, they're psychological, they're emotional, right? And so we still get the same response, the body prompting us to seek out energy and food, to get that energy. But again, we're not actually burning it or using it for the stress, okay? So yeah, we haven't adapted, our brains and our bodies have not adapted as quickly as the types of stressors in our lives have changed, okay? So there are some real, again, biological reasons that you may feel prompted to eat. And there's also some biological reasons that we eat certain foods to make us feel better, because we know that certain types of foods can have a physical response in the brain and trigger certain feel-good chemicals and hormones and neurotransmitters. So we do know that eating sugary things, high carb things, salty things, high fat things, all the things we tend to crave when we're feeling emotional, we know that these foods cause a response in the brain that, again, will temporarily make you feel better. So, you're not crazy if you think, geez, when I do eat those things, I do feel better, at least for a few moments, there's a reason for that. Okay. It's that reward center in your brain responding to those types of foods. That's also why most people feel like they don't crave carrots and hummus when they're feeling emotional, because that doesn't have any of the stuff in it that would generally really light up that reward system in your brain and make you feel better for a few moments. So there is a reason for that. And sometimes just knowing that helps. Not that we can change that kind of physiology and the way that we're wired, but sometimes just understanding what's going on in your body and why is reassuring to people. So this is what the emotional eating cycle looks like. This probably looks familiar to folks. I guess if you kind of start up there at like 11 o'clock, there's a specific trigger, right? There's something that happens that triggers a certain emotion. Now, typically in emotional eating, I would say it's an uncomfortable emotion. And like I said, emotional eating can happen with positive emotions too. But I think for most people, what is problematic is the emotional eating when there's negative or uncomfortable emotions, okay? Unwanted emotions. So then, okay, you eat, food to soothe yourself, right? And like I said, there's actually some, biological roots and why we might do that. Then the problem, of course, is that that often leads to overeating because at this point you are not eating to satisfy any kind of physical hunger typically. It is more an emotional hunger. And so if you are eating to kind of numb feelings or stuff them down or distract yourself, you are likely to eat more food than you actually need in that moment, right? You actually don't really probably need any food because you're not physically hungry and you don't need that energy that comes from food, right? So you're likely to overeat because you're just eating to just, again, distract or, numb yourself. And then because of that, right, then you feel like the shame and guilt afterwards. You feel bad probably for a few reasons, right? You're beating yourself up that, oh, geez, now I've just added to my problems because not only did I have these uncomfortable emotions, but now I've eaten all this, junk I didn't think I was supposed to eat and wasn't hungry for to help myself feel better. And now that once that wears off, now I just feel bad about all of it. And the really tricky thing that happens with this cycle is that sometimes that shame and guilt that happens from emotional eating just feeds into more emotional eating, right? Because shame and guilt are emotions in and of themselves that are not very comfortable, that you might start eating more again to distract yourself from that. So that is why this often becomes kind of a self-perpetuating cycle because of that too. Okay. All right, so let's talk about some specific triggers for emotional eating. Just because I do want to be sure that we're trying to maybe put some language, specific language to different types of emotions. And we're going to do that a little bit further on in this discussion too. But I think it's good to try to like kind of categorize what the different types of emotions might be that would prompt you to eat. So first of all, of course, I think stress and anxiety would be big ones. I mean, these are two distinct emotions, but I think can kind of fall under the same umbrella. And this is where, again, you're going to get a lot of times that flight or fight response where you're going to get those boosts in adrenaline and cortisol and get, feeling like you need to eat, right, to fight off the threat. For some people, it works the opposite way. Maybe there's people here that feel that way, that their appetite gets depressed when they're or suppressed when they're stressed. That happens, but I feel like a lot of people feel like it prompts them to eat. But yeah, when you're in a stressful situation, sometimes something really threatening, to your safety or something, your body does kind of adapt to put all the resources into responding at that moment. So it will, move blood away from your stomach into, trying to, put it into your arms and legs and your brain so you can, in your heart rate, and so you can, kind of respond to kind of that immediate threat. But again, those are not the types of stressors most of us are facing on a day-to-day basis. There's also boredom or maybe procrastination could be lumped into this category. Maybe you eat because it's something that fills the time or helps pass the time. Maybe it makes a boring task more tolerable. Or maybe it's, again, something you can just do to put off doing something that you don't want to do, right? That's undesirable. Um, I hear this a lot, I feel like from employees who feel kind of bored at their jobs during the day, that this prompts a lot of emotional eating for that reason. It's just a way to make the day a little bit more fun and enjoyable. Um, the next category there, bribery, reward, celebration. I'm lumping all of these together. One of the big things that comes to mind here is, I think, kind of that when I said we are trained from an early age to associate food with certain emotions or, just things happening in life. This happens from an early age. If you think about, even potty training, I know that a lot of, parents may use, treats or foods as a reward for potty training, or maybe bribery to get kids to do what you want them to do. I have seen with my own kids, food and treats being used for reward and bribery from, from daycare days. I mean, when they were very young, and I see that still perpetuated into, the K through 12 system. So again, this is a pretty commonly used function of food to reward people, especially kids or even adults. We do that a lot too, or to bribe, younger people into doing what we want them to do, or to come to something we want them to come to, right? And then, of course, there's celebration, which is probably the least concerning of all the triggers for emotional eating. Like, of course, maybe get a promotion at work or a raise. You're like, yeah, let's go out to eat, or the kids won their, soccer championship. Let's go get some pizza. I mean, these kinds of things, right? I do think that's a little bit more of a cultural reflection of the importance food plays in our society and bonding, and that's okay. Um, Soothing and comfort. This is, I think, often also linked to maybe our experiences growing up, how we were comforted, maybe, right, as kids. Um, maybe you grew up in a household where it was like, oh, you feel sad, like, oh, let's cheer you up and go get some ice cream, which again is not an issue in and of itself. But if this is the mechanism for coping that was modeled for you repeatedly growing up, well, now maybe it's an issue, right? Because now you have learned to associate, needing comfort with getting ice cream, or insert whatever other foods you want into that equation. All right. And like I said, there can be a real psychological effect of food, especially in those, again, high sugar, high carb, high fat, high salt foods, that can make you feel kind of calmer and comforted for a short period of time. Frustration, anger, or rage. The one thing I'll say about this category is that if you're often craving crunchy foods, that might be a sign that frustration, anger, or rage is motivating your eating at that point, because that is what people tend to want when they are feeling those emotions. Food can also be love and connection. It is, again, very much how we show love to people, how we receive love from people, how we socialize. We do a lot of socializing around food. It's how we, show other people that maybe they're, part of the group and they're included. So yeah, it takes on a pretty big significance that way. Food can also mean excitement. The example that comes to my mind here is COVID. I mean, how many clients did I hear say to me, during 2020 and 2021, at the height of, lockdowns and being at home for a lot of people, that life felt really dull because you couldn't go do other things. And so food became a way to, inject some excitement and novelty into, your day. Um, in some ways that was good for people. Some people ended up cooking more at home and experimenting with more foods, but for a lot of people, it just ended up being, just it was something different and fun to do. And again, probably a distraction from all of these other emotions we just talked about that went along with COVID for people as well. And then finally, food can be a release. We see this in a lot of folks who maybe are very much in control of other areas of their life, right? Like I've got it all together with my, professional life and, personal life and, all of that. But maybe food is the one area where they feel like they can let go a little bit and not have to control. And food becomes symbolic of that in the way that they achieve that. So yeah, you can see looking at this list, right? There's a lot of different emotional triggers for eating. And I think it's important to start thinking about what tend to be your primary triggers. I mean, any one of us can experience any of these at any time, but I think a lot of people, if they were to think about where a bulk of their emotional eating comes from, could probably hone in on two or three of these emotions that tend to be the primary drivers of that. So hopefully that helps you to kind of start thinking about it that way. Okay, how are we doing so far? Any questions, comments, thoughts so far? Okay. I do want to talk now for a moment about physical versus emotional hunger. Does anybody feel like they struggle to distinguish between these two things? I think that sometimes, yeah, I think it's important to talk about, whoa, Marquitas, yes. April, yes. Okay. Yeah, so I think this is a really good place to start, okay? Because this is the fundamental first question to ask yourself when you feel like eating, am I actually hungry? Am I physically hungry, right? So, that kind of should always be the very first thought. As soon as you think of food or eating in any way, you should ask yourself, well, am I physically hungry? Because this will help guide you as to what to do, okay? Karen, yes, you will receive these slides afterwards, okay? So yeah, don't feel like you have to furiously write down these notes or anything. We'll have it for you. Azetta will send that out. So yeah, the first thing, yeah, when you're thinking about food or even eating is, am I physically hungry? And this chart is a good, I think, basic start for how to start to distinguish between physical or emotional hunger. So physical hunger usually develops pretty gradually. And that's because if you think about how physical hunger works, when you eat, right, your body is slowly digesting whatever you've given it, and it's slowly releasing glucose into your bloodstream for energy, right, for your cells and to function. And when that release of glucose starts to wear off, is when you start now probably feeling hungry again. All right. So that's a very gradual process. And for most people who are tuned into their physical hunger, they can start to notice the early signs of it, right? You start to feel a little bit of the, emptiness in the stomach or, a little bit of, growling, things like this. You might also feel other things like, oh, my focus is getting, not very good, or, I'm getting a little agitated or shaky. That means you probably really are getting pretty hungry at that point. But an emotional hunger will happen much more suddenly. This is, I think, a very telltale sign, right? That it feels very urgent. Like, whoa, that just came out of nowhere. Where'd that come from? That I have this thought to eat. Okay. Now, there are some folks who struggle with recognizing the growing or the gradual buildup of physical hunger. And so for some people, physical hunger can feel very sudden as well, where maybe they can ignore the physical hunger while they're distracted and busy and doing things. But as soon as they slow down and stop, it's like, oh, bam, now I notice my physical hunger. Okay. Um, so I do think if you're someone like that, it might be even harder because it's sudden in both situations to just to use that as a distinguishing factor. All right. So you maybe want to tune in at that point to what's happening with my body. Like, do I feel those signs of physical hunger with like the growling and the lower energy and lack of focus and getting irritable or getting a little shaky or, things like that. So that can be tricky, but that's where I think it's beneficial to learn what emerging signs of physical hunger feel like for you, so it's less confusing when you feel this urgent need to eat. It'll be easier to decide if it was physical or emotional hunger. Physical hunger often, is in the stomach. I think when it starts taking an emotional toll or a psychological toll is when it's probably gotten too far. Because if you really are feeling, irritable and like you can't focus, then you've probably actually waited too long to eat. You're at that like hangry stage now. But physical hunger, a normal physical hunger is generally felt in the stomach somehow for people, okay? Whereas emotional hunger is really a head hunger, right? There's really nothing happening in the stomach that indicates hunger. It is just really a thought in your head. This is an interesting distinction here with physical and emotional hunger. If you are physically hungry, and if you think about this, I think it makes sense to most people. If you're physically hungry, you're going to be pretty flexible about what foods you want to eat because the primary incentive right now is to get something in your stomach and get some energy, right? That's what, physical hunger is driving you to do. And so you're going to be pretty flexible about what foods can do that. Whereas emotional hunger, as we've kind of already alluded to, may have you fixated on some very specific foods. Okay? Like, oh, what are some high fat, high sugar things? Ice cream, chocolate, chips are salty and high fat. That would fit in the category. What else? You guys name some. What are some other kind of emotional foods you crave? Yeah, pizza, great example. Uh-huh. Thanks, Izetta. Yeah, it makes sense, right? When you think about it. This is when the carrots and hummus are like, that's totally not an option because that's it's emotional hunger. Now, if you were physically hungry, maybe you'd be more open to carrots and hummus because they're like, I just need food, and you do, right? Fries, that's another, yeah, another great example. Okay, so yeah, paying attention to that, all right. And then finally, kind of like we've already talked about, you know, physical hunger will be satisfied when your stomach is full. Now, I'm speaking very generally. Not everybody feels like this is the case for them. Some people feel like they do have a hard time figuring out when to stop eating. Um, in a way that makes them feel comfortably full. A lot of people do still struggle with kind of eating past the point of comfortable fullness and being able to judge that. But for the most part, right, you're like, okay, I feel full now. I'll stop eating. Whereas, like I said, in that emotional eating cycle, you're not eating because you're hungry or trying to fill your stomach. You are trying to like soothe yourself or numb yourself or distract yourself. And so who knows how much food you will eat till you feel like that has been accomplished, right? And that is where often that kind of overeating happens, and then you get the guilt and shame afterwards, okay? Sonara, let's see, carbs specifically for me is the emotional hunger. Yeah, I mean, yeah, chocolate, sweets, Karen said. I mean, I seriously, if I was, having an emotional eating trigger, I would be like, and you put like some kind of loaf of bread in front of me, I'd be like, woohoo, that would feel really soothing. It's not sweet, it's not really salty, but it's carby. And again, those kind of quick carbs are something still that flight or fight response is going to prompt you to want to eat more of. Yeah. So it could just be like pasta and rice and breads and things like that too. Okay. Any other thoughts on this one? Let's add something here too. And we already looked at this in that emotional eating cycle where it ended in shame and guilt. But I want to add that as another hallmark of emotional hunger. If you eat in response to physical hunger and then your stomach is full, you don't feel guilty about that. I mean, you don't. You're like, I was hungry, I needed to eat. Like, okay. Like, you don't feel that same kind of guilt or shame, but you do likely feel that if you've eaten, again, because of an emotional trigger. So a lot of times, how you feel after eating is a telltale sign. If you feel that guilt or shame or whatever afterwards, that is a very telltale sign, again, that this was triggered by emotional hunger and not physical hunger, too. Okay. Anything else you would add to this in terms of how you guys feel physical or emotional hunger or how you make the distinction? Okay. So what we're going to do now in the second half here is talk about what we can do before, during, and after emotional eating. Okay. In terms of just strategies to help us. All right. So that's kind of how I have it organized here for the last few slides. So before it happens, I would look at these strategies as kind of preventive measures, ways to help you minimize the likelihood you will feel triggers to emotionally eat. Okay. So the first thing would be to engage in basic self care. By this, I mean things like, it all sounds so easy. I know it's not, but things like, again, just general proper nourishment, eating regularly throughout the day as you need to, and honoring your physical hunger. Eating decently nutrient dense foods that give your body the fuel and nutrients it needs. Moving your body in ways that your body does really want you to do and feel good for your body. Sleep for sure is a big one. Just general rest, kind of whatever kind of helps you kind of recharge and in rest. Maybe there's also, there's the connection kind of social piece, feeling like have connection and purpose in your life, and feeling that maybe you're part of a community and have, people who are supportive around you. These are all kinds of basic kind of self-care things that if they aren't in place, can make you more susceptible to emotional eating. Okay. Because, for example, if you are sleep deprived, okay, we know that you get some major changes in your hormones when you're sleep deprived that actually uh, make your brain more susceptible to feeling the reward of eating certain foods. Like your reward center in your brain is more sensitive to food reward when you are sleep deprived, right? Um, you are, again, if you are feeling kind of a lack of connection to people, right? You may be just eating to fill that void. If you feel like your life is just kind of chaos and there's no rest, right? Food may just be something that you're not even being mindful about or thinking about. So yeah, I think focusing on self-care and making sure those basic pieces are in place where you're getting, nourishment, sleep, rest, connection, managing, stress to a degree, okay, not living in like crisis mode all the time. Those would be things to focus on. If any of those areas feel very Oh, it's not easy. I know, Annalie, and I'd be curious to know exactly if there's certain elements of self-care I've mentioned that feel particularly difficult for you. But no, it's not easy. But the point is, I think sometimes we're so focused on solving the issue of emotional eating at the eating level that we forget about all the things that make us more susceptible to emotional eating. And perhaps it would be just as worthy of your time and effort to focus on those things like self-care is a way to manage emotional eating, right? So it's just not about the eating and the food. It's about the things that are making us susceptible to emotional eating, right? We're we're going to be more susceptible to emotional eating when we're feeling total stress and chaos in our lives, right? Because every little thing will feel super emotional and affect us more, right? Same with like a lack of sleep or if we're not properly nourishing ourselves, right? So yeah, it's just, yeah, I think that that is a place that people overlook. And so, maybe, there'd be a lot of other reasons to focus on, more movement, right? But think you don't want to think of it as totally independent of emotional eating. Same with managing stress. That can actually help you overall with emotional eating. Getting more sleep can help you with that, among other things, right? So not underestimating the importance of these basic self-care components, okay? A lot of people are susceptible to emotional eating because they are on overly restrictive eating regimens. Maybe folks are following, a very restrictive type of weight loss diet, or maybe they are following a very restrictive diet to manage a chronic health condition. Might be lots of reasons, okay? But whatever eating pattern you're following, if it starts to feel, yeah, too restrictive, you start to feel deprived of things you would actually like to eat, um, then that is going to make you more susceptible to emotional eating because any little emotion can easily be turned into an excuse to eat something you are not supposed to, right? And you get with a lot of these restrictive diets and eating protocol, you get like a lot of rules and things like that too. And sometimes if you break the rule of the diet, that can be an emotional trigger, right? That can be like, oh, gee, I screwed up. And then as a way to make yourself feel better, you just go eat all the things you didn't think you were supposed to eat, right? Because you feel bad about screwing up. So we want to be really careful with overly restrictive diets. Of course, like I've already mentioned, we want to learn to recognize physical hunger, being able to distinguish between physical and emotional hunger in those ways that we looked at is critical. Being strategic about the foods you keep around in your house. Anybody do this? And I don't mean this again is a way that creates restriction and deprivation. I don't quite mean it that way. But I do mean it as if you really feel vulnerable with emotional eating and one of your go-to foods with emotional eating is ice cream, then maybe don't keep ice cream readily available to yourself. Now, does this mean you shouldn't go take yourself out once in a while to enjoy an ice cream when you feel like enjoying ice cream? No, that's perfectly fine. And in that situation, it's not really hopefully emotionally driven. It's more about, I just want to enjoy some ice cream. That's great. Yeah, April, right. I mean, most people feel that way. If it's not in the house, I can't eat it. And it does kind of force you to find other ways to cope with whatever this emotion is, right? So yeah, again, I'm not saying this to be restrictive and to deprive yourself of foods that you like, but I think a lot of us recognize we have kind of go-to trigger foods when we are feeling some of these emotions that are best just not to have around. Okay, so think very carefully about that. Um, and plan for non-food ways to distract or soothe yourself. We're going to talk about some more specific ideas, but my point in saying this now is you can't think of helpful non-food ways to distract or soothe yourself when you're in the moment of an emotion. It's just not how the brain works, right? Your brain cannot do creative problem solving when you are having kind of that hot emotional reaction. It just is not going to happen. So I that's why I tell people to be proactive. Think while you're calm, before you're in that moment, make a little list of what are some things I can do to distract myself or calm myself down when I feel these emotions. Okay? Yeah. So when this happens, okay, now you feel that, the triggers happen and now you're feeling this, having this emotional response, feeling probably likely an uncomfortable emotion. Okay. Couple things to do. And these are kind of similar, but they might resonate differently with you, depending. Delay, distract, decide. Now, this is not something I made up. This is something that is pretty common in like what we call cognitive behavioral therapy. Some of you may be familiar with that. But the whole idea is to give yourself like a cooling off period. And that's what I was talking about in the first slide. Remember, we looked at that quote about going straight from feelings to eating with no like processing in between, right? Where it feels very automatic and habitual to people. This is how we start to learn to pause. I call it a mental pause button. So delay, distract, decide. So the idea is once you feel this emotion, again, you have to be able to say, okay, I've got this emotion, right? You're going to delay. All right, I'm going to not decide right now whether to eat something or not. That's the first step. I'm going, and maybe that's like 10 minutes. That's usually what they recommend, 10 minutes of just delaying making a decision. Okay. And a lot of people feel like, yeah, I can do that. Okay, I can hold off just for 10 minutes. That's not forever. That's manageable. Distract yourself with a non-food activity. So again, this is where it will be really helpful to have already a pre-made list of things you could decide to do instead of going to the kitchen and getting some ice cream, say. And then after the 10 minutes, decide what you're going to do. Now, maybe at the end of the 10 minutes, you still decide to go get some ice cream or cookies or chips or whatever that was. Okay. Um, but maybe, just maybe, after 10 minutes of a cooling off period, maybe you realize, like, oh, maybe that emotion has subsided a little bit. Maybe it doesn't feel so intense. Maybe I've gotten involved in something else now that I'm distracted with, and I'll just keep doing that. So you at least give yourself a chance to make a different decision and to make a more rational kind of reason or logic based decision, right? You're giving your brain time to switch over from that kind of hot emotional part of your brain to the more logic reason part of your brain. Okay. Another way to look at this, when you feel that emotion, might be to ask yourself these three questions. And this is where, like I said, knowing the difference between physical and emotional hunger is really important. So, first, you ask if you feel like, okay, I want to eat, you say, all right, am I physically hungry? If the answer is yes, oh, yeah, I actually do feel a little grumbly in my stomach and it feels kind of empty. Let me try to eat some food first to take care of that and then revisit. So that's pretty straightforward. If you realize you're physically hungry, okay, let me do that first and then we'll see. Okay. Because again, it can be very easy to mix up physical and emotional hunger. Now, if you decide, no, I'm not actually physically hungry, I know I'm not, then you move on. All right. What's driving this, desire to eat? What am I feeling? What do I need? Okay. And I'm going to show you a couple of slides here to help you walk through each of those. I did not create this. The credit is given here in the middle of the circle, this emotion sensation wheel. I really like this for a couple reasons. One is you can see how everything's color coded, right? And they all stem from those kind of core six emotion categories in the center of the wheel: fear, anger, disgust, sad, happy, and surprise. And then you can see like the emotions get a little bit more specific within each category, which also might be helpful, right? When we talked about, how important it is to try to be able to like recognize the emotions you're feeling, right? You need to be able to do that to maybe know what you need. That's the point, okay? So being able to get as specific as you can with labeling your feelings and emotions is going to be helpful. The other reason I like this wheel is because that outer area is showing you physical sensations you might be having because of these emotions. And this is really helpful to kind of create a little bit of that mind-body connection because your body is really good at giving you signals and telling you what it needs and what it's feeling. All right. So it can be really helpful to think about, okay, what physical sensations am I having? Am I clenching my jaw? Am I, is my stomach feeling kind of fluttery? Am I fidgeting? Does my face feel hot? I mean, look at all, and there's a range of physical manifestations of feelings that you might be experiencing that can really help you tune into what those feelings might be if you're unsure. Do you guys tend to have certain physical manifestations of any of these feelings that you've noticed? I get a lot of butterfly weirdness in my stomach. I get a lot of heart racing and I get like sweaty palms. Those seem to be my main physical reactions to certain emotions. Yeah, jaw clenching, heart racing. Oh, jaw clenching again. Yeah. But again, sometimes these, if we notice these physical sensations, sometimes they tip us off to the emotion before we've even like realized we're feeling that emotion. That's the amazing thing about your body is that it's giving you these signals, right? So paying attention to that. And again, that's why it's really helpful to build kind of a mind-body connection because your body is always giving you feedback about its needs, right? Whether it's about rest or food or feelings, right? It's amazing that way. Oh, slouching. That's an interesting one. Okay, and then this chart here, it's kind of more just for example purposes. You might want to build your own chart and fill in your own things, but the idea is that a lot of emotions can be addressed in one of these four ways with distraction, support, confronting the feelings, and self-care. There are probably other categories folks could think of here, but these are some primary ones. And so the idea might be that depending on what the emotion is and what's, triggering it, you might need different things, right? You might just need a distraction. You might actually need support from somebody. You might need to pay attention to self-care, right? Because that's been neglected, whatever. So you can come up with some things within each category, and I've given you some examples here, maybe to get you started. Okay. But I like this too, this idea, because it just gives you flexibility. One, it helps you brainstorm what to do before the problem happens, but then also you have some flexibility of figuring out, what am I feeling and what do I need? And you have some very specific ideas to meet these different needs. Okay. All right. And then finally, believe it or not, oh, Annalie, so and maybe I can get more information to Azetta about this to share with you afterwards. We do have an agreement with Headspace. Yeah. Thank you, Azetta. Yeah. I just don't know the specifics right now of like where to go on the website or how to get more information, but I will try to share that with Azetta. Yes. But yeah, that like yeah, and that was again, I think that was one of the things on here, right? Like try a therapy app. I don't know that Headspace is technically called that, but right, there's a lot of apps out there that can help bring you through breathing exercises, right? Or a quick meditation, or even an app that can help you like journal your feelings and things like that. Yeah. Oh, thank you, Azetta. She is on it. So there's the link if you want to find out more. Okay, so there are actually some things you should think about doing afterwards. So even if, okay, you've got this, trigger and the emotion and you eat in response and now you feel bad, okay, there's still actually some work to do, right? We don't want to just call it a complete loss here, right? We want to learn from it. So, but the first thing is to, oh yeah, thanks, Izetta, for remembering that too. Yes, creating calming spaces. The first thing you want to do is respond with self-compassion. But I think a lot of you would probably agree that our first instinct is to respond with self-flagellation, where we just beat ourselves up, right? How could you be so stupid? Why did you do that? Now you've just made it worse. And right, this is the spiral we go down. Okay. Um, what the research tells us, though, is if we can use self-compassion, we are actually more likely to behave in the way that we want to afterwards. Okay. So self-compassion means basically showing yourself kindness, treating yourself like you would a friend. It means recognizing your humanity, which means you are imperfect and you make mistakes, okay, just like everybody else. These are all elements of self-compassion. Um, and they've done research, right, where they actually there's one study where I guess they gave I don't know, two groups of women, they gave them donuts and they're like, here, eat donuts or whatever. And then one group of women, after they ate the donuts, got a message, or didn't get a message, but the second group of women who ate donuts, they got like a self-compassion message given to them that said like, oh, you're, you know it's okay, and get like a positive message and kind of again reinforcing self-compassion and kindness. And then they serve them more like donuts or some other kind of not so healthy food, and the women who got the message of self-compassion in between the two foods were less likely to eat the second food that came along. Again, with the idea being that, well, now they were able to kind of reroute their thinking to be more, compassionate towards themselves and forgiving of themselves. And that actually helped them resist like the next food that came along. Okay. Whereas the people who were so busy, probably beating themselves up about it, were more likely to eat the next food. So, okay. So it really does help. Um, the other thing about self-compassion is that if we're so busy beating ourselves up, we have no capacity to learn from what happened. And that really is what should also happen after any, kind of incident of emotional eating, of just not like it has to be some deep psychoanalysis, but at least just thinking about like, oh, I just ate when I felt yucky and I didn't like doing that and I don't really want to do that again. Like what happened here? And just do a little kind of post-game analysis of what was the trigger, what happened, what did I do or not do, that maybe I could, do differently next time, and learn from it. I mean, these experiences really are just completely wasted if we're not at least learning something from them. Okay. So don't let them be a total loss. Try to learn something from it. And I know this sounds weird, this final thought here, but emotional eating, it can be viewed as a bit of a gift. It clearly, as we've, for all the reasons we talked about today, it does shine a light on what needs our attention. Okay, clearly we're eating because of some emotion, and once we know that, we can find better ways to meet those needs, right? And maybe avoid, future feelings of wanting to eat in response to emotions. Okay, but it really is telling us something's off, needs our attention, our needs are not being met, and we need to find some new ways to do that. So, that is one way to view emotional eating. All right. Well, that was a lot, I know, in not too much time. I am happy to answer any questions or entertain any comments that you might have at this point.
If you have questions, you are welcome to put them in the chat or unmute yourself and ask your question.
Tina, yeah, you're going to get a copy of the slides. I have not yet sent them to Izetta, but I will do so immediately after this, and she will send you an email with the recording and the slides. Oh, well, you're very welcome. I appreciate you all being here today. And like I said, if this has brought up kind of some curiosity or motivation to explore this a little more for yourself, feel free to reach out to me one-on-one, and we can set something up to chat about that sometime, okay?